True disturbing school trip horror stories, English ghosts, Mr. 9 scares. It was a chilly autumn morning when we set off on our school trip. A group of excited students, eagerly talking about the upcoming adventure. The plan was simple, a visit to an old English manor house nestled in the countryside. Rumor had it that the place was haunted, but we were too young to take the stories seriously. After all, ghost tales were just that, stories. Our teacher, Mr. Stevens, led the way, his voice booming as he explained the manor's history. But there was something off about the place, an eerie silence that seemed to hang in the air. Despite the crisp rustling of leaves outside, it was almost as if the manor itself was watching us, waiting. As we roamed the halls, we were told about the manor's previous owner, a man known only as Mr. 9. A legend surrounded him. He was a reclusive figure, never seen during the day but rumored to roam the halls at night. The most chilling part of his story was that every person who met him would be marked by a single ghostly number, the number 9. Some said it was a warning, others a curse. Later in the day, after exploring the dark corners of the manor, I wandered off alone, drawn to the old library at the back of the house. Dust particles danced in the thin shafts of light as I pushed open the heavy wooden door. Inside, rows of books towered over me, their spines faded and ancient. There was a sense of isolation, but I didn't mind. That was until I noticed the faint sound of footsteps behind me, the echo soft and slow. At first, I thought it was one of my friends, but when I turned around, the hallway was empty. My heart began to race as the footsteps grew louder. Now right behind me, panic set in, and I turned to face what I thought was a prankster. But there was nothing, no one. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Suddenly, a cold gust of wind swept through the library, making the bookshelves creak and groan. I turned to leave, only to be met with an overwhelming sense of dread. The door slammed shut behind me with a force that made the entire room shake. It was then that I saw it, on the dusty floor, just beneath my feet, the number 9, written in dark, smudged ink. I couldn't breathe. I didn't know whether to run or scream, but my legs froze. The library was suffocating, its walls closing in around me. Just as quickly as it appeared, the number vanished, leaving only the overwhelming chill in the air. I stumbled out of the room, heart pounding, and found my classmates, who were just as uneasy. They had heard the stories too. We all agreed we needed to leave, but it wasn't until we returned to the bus that the real horror unfolded. One of our classmates, Jake, had gone missing. We had searched every room of the manor, but there was no sign of him. Panic set in as Mr. Stevens tried to keep everyone calm. But deep down, we all knew something was horribly wrong. As we waited outside, the sun dipped below the horizon. We were ready to leave, but when we glanced back at the manor, we saw him, Jake, standing at the top of the stairs, looking down at us. He was smiling, but it wasn't a smile that belonged to him. His eyes were hollow, his skin pale. The number 9 was etched across his forehead, glowing faintly in the dark. We never saw Jake again. Some say he was claimed by the spirit of Mr. 9, a warning to anyone who dared to step foot in the manor. Others believe he was cursed, forever trapped in that eerie place, with the number 9 marking his fate. Whatever the truth may be, the legend of Mr. 9 still lingers. I know one thing for certain, that school trip was a lesson I'll never forget, and the number 9 will forever haunt my memories. The days following our terrifying experience at the manor were a blur of whispers and unanswered questions. The school tried to reassure the parents, telling them that Jake had simply run away during the trip, but none of us believed it. We knew what we had seen. Weeks later, I couldn't shake the haunting memories of that trip. The image of Jake, standing at the top of the stairs, his eyes lifeless and cold, kept replaying in my mind. It wasn't just the sight of him that disturbed me. It was the feeling that something was watching me, waiting, even at home, in the safety of my room. I couldn't escape the oppressive presence. I began to see shadows out of the corner of my eye, feel a coldness that had no source. It was as though Mr. 9 was still with me, lingering in the darkness. One evening, my curiosity got the best of me. I decided to revisit the manor, even though I knew I should never go back. Something inside me urged me to find answers, to understand the truth behind the ghostly figure of Mr. 9. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that I was being drawn back. I convinced two of my closest friends, Sarah and Tom, to come with me. We drove to the manor in the dead of night, knowing the risk but unable to resist. The manor stood there, towering and ominous, bathed in moonlight. The once beautiful estate now seemed to grow darker with each passing second. We hesitated at the gate but crossed the threshold together, our hearts pounding in our chests. The inside of the manor was even worse than I remembered. The air felt thick with an unnatural weight. The creaking floorboards, the broken windows, and the flickering candlelight in the distance made it feel like time had stood still in this forsaken place. We made our way to the library, where I had encountered the number 9. As we entered, the temperature dropped significantly, and I could see my breath in the air. Sarah clutched my arm in fear as Tom stood by the door, too afraid to move forward. Then, it happened. We heard the footsteps, slow and deliberate, just as I had heard before. They echoed down the hall, growing louder. My blood ran cold, and I instinctively looked toward the dark corner of the room. There, at the far end of the library, stood a figure, tall, thin, and shrouded in darkness, but unmistakably there. It was Mr. 9. His face was hidden in shadows, but his eyes glowed with an eerie light, and his mouth twisted into a cruel smile. The number 9 appeared on the floor again, just as it had the day I first saw it. This time, though, the number wasn't just written, it was burned into the wood, as if scorched by an invisible fire. Sarah screamed, her voice shrill and panicked, as we backed away, but it was too late. Mr. 9 moved toward us, his footsteps slow but relentless. Every step he took felt like it was drawing him closer to our souls. I could feel the suffocating dread around me, like a thick fog that was making it harder to breathe. We turned to run, but the door slammed shut with a force that rattled the entire room. Trapped. In a panic, we frantically searched for another exit, but all the windows were sealed tight. The air felt heavier, and the shadows seemed to stretch, moving closer to us with every passing second. And then, just as quickly as it had started, everything stopped. The footsteps faded, and the oppressive darkness lifted. We were left in a suffocating silence, the kind that makes your heart pound louder than any noise. I turned to look at my friends, but they were staring at something behind me, their faces pale. I hesitated, slowly turning around. There, in the middle of the room, was the number 9, but this time, it was etched into the air itself, glowing with a sickly green hue, pulsating as though it had a life of its own. And in the midst of it, stood Jake. His eyes were blank, and his mouth was frozen in a horrific grin. He didn't say anything, but his presence alone felt like a warning. "Leave," I whispered, my voice trembling. The others nodded in fear, and we bolted for the door. Just as we reached the entrance, the number 9 flashed one last time, and the door flew open on its own. We didn't look back. We never spoke of the manor again. The terror of what we saw that night, Jake, the number 9, and Mr. 9 haunted us in ways we couldn't explain. We all went our separate ways after that night, and none of us ever returned to the manor. To this day, we still don't know what happened to Jake. We only know that whatever force was at play in that manor still lingers, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to cross its threshold. But I do know this, Mr. 9 isn't just a ghost, he's a curse, and anyone who encounters him will forever be marked by the number 9, trapped in a nightmare they can't escape. Months passed, and life gradually returned to some semblance of normalcy. Though the memories of that night still haunted us, we stayed away from the manor, as we had promised each other, and pretended it was just a bad dream. But as time went on, I began to notice strange occurrences that couldn't be easily explained. It started with small things, misplaced items, strange sounds in the middle of the night, and shadows moving in the corners of my vision. I told myself I was just imagining things, after all. Who wouldn't be shaken by such a traumatic experience? But one evening, it got worse. I was alone in my room, trying to focus on homework, when I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate, just like those footsteps in the manor. My heart raced as I stood up and checked the door. No one was there. I opened the door cautiously, but the hallway was empty. Still, the footsteps continued, now sounding closer, as if they were right outside my room. A chill ran down my spine. I rushed downstairs, checking every room, but found nothing. Yet when I returned to my bedroom, The unmistakable feeling of someone, or something, watching me filled the air. It was then that I saw it. On the wall next to my bed, faint but undeniable, was the number 9, just as it had appeared at the manor. It now marked my very room. I reached out to touch it, but my hand froze inches from the wall as a cold gust of wind swept through the room. The lights flickered, and a voice whispered in the dark. 9. I stumbled backward, my pulse racing. The whispering grew louder, and the air grew colder still. My room seemed to warp and twist, like the shadows themselves were coming to life. The figure I had feared, the one I had seen in the manor, emerged from the darkness. His eyes glowed in the dark, piercing through the room with an almost inhuman intensity. Mr. 9. You're marked, he whispered, his voice echoing in my head. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, trapped in the grip of terror. His figure loomed closer, and the number 9 continued to glow, now more vivid than ever, its lines sharp and cruel. Leave, now, he hissed, the room growing colder still. The air felt suffocating, as if the very walls were closing in on me. I struggled to breathe, my body trembling in fear, but somehow, I managed to break free from the trance and bolted for the door. I didn't look back. I rushed out of the house, into the night, not stopping until I reached the woods behind my neighborhood. I stood there, breathless, waiting for the sensation of being followed to pass, but it never did. For the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was always just behind me. No matter where I went, I could feel Mr. 9's presence, in the corners of rooms, in the shadows, and in the sound of footsteps just beyond my reach. I couldn't escape. One afternoon, I met Sarah and Tom, both of them visibly shaken, at a local cafe. They confessed that they, too, had been experiencing similar things, cold spots, whispers, and the number 9 appearing in places they least expected. It was as though the curse of Mr. 9 had followed us, marking us wherever we went. We were all connected by that single, terrifying number. Then, something even stranger happened. We received a letter, no return address, no name, just a single piece of paper with the number 9 written in blood-red ink. Beneath it were the words, "You cannot escape, you are mine." That was the final straw. We knew we had to find a way to break the curse, to stop Mr. 9 from following us. But how? The stories we had heard never mentioned an escape, and none of the old legends gave us a clue. But we had to try. We returned to the manor once more, desperate for answers, even if it meant facing the horrors that awaited us there. The manor was just as we left it, dark, abandoned, and full of the eerie silence that made the air feel heavy. But this time, we didn't explore the rooms. We headed straight for the library, the place where it all began. There, in the center of the room, the number 9 was etched into the floor once again, glowing faintly. But something was different this time. As we stood around the number, the shadows in the room began to writhe and twist, forming shapes that seemed to reach out toward us. The figure of Mr. 9 emerged from the darkness, his smile even more twisted than before. "You came to end it," he said, his voice like 1,000 whispers, "but this is only the beginning." And with those words, the ground beneath our feet began to tremble, as if the very foundation of the manor was coming alive. We couldn't escape, we couldn't run, and as the darkness closed in around us, I realized one terrifying truth. Once you are marked by Mr. 9, there is no escape. The ground continued to shake beneath our feet, sending tremors through our bodies. The walls seemed to pulse, as though the manor itself was alive, alive with anger, hunger. I could feel Mr. 9's presence growing stronger, a weight that pressed on my chest, making it harder to breathe. His figure stood before us, his eyes glowing with malice, and that horrible smile stretched wider with each passing second. "We are connected now," Mr. 9 whispered, his voice dripping with menace. "All of you, forever." The floor beneath us began to crack, and the number 9, glowing faintly at first, now burned bright, searing into my eyes. It spread outward like wildfire, slowly consuming the room. The shadows around us writhed, twisting into grotesque shapes, some of which seemed to reach for us, their forms half human, half monster. It felt like the walls themselves were closing in, the air growing thick and oppressive, choking us with fear. "We need to break the curse," I gasped, trying to keep my voice steady. My thoughts racing. There has to be a way. Tom, wide-eyed and terrified, stumbled back, bumping into one of the shelves. It rattled and groaned, and a book fell to the ground with a loud thud. We all looked down at the book, a dusty old volume that seemed out of place among the other, more modern texts. Without thinking, I bent down to pick it up. The cover was simple, faded with age, and the title was barely visible, but the words "The Binding of Souls" stood out in strange, twisted lettering. I opened it, feeling a coldness seep into my bones as I read the first page. The book was filled with strange symbols, rituals, and incantations, most of which were written in a language I didn't understand. But one word caught my attention: sacramentum. I wasn't sure what it meant, but something about it felt important. "We have to try," I said urgently, flipping through the pages, scanning for anything that might help. But with every turn of the page, the shadows in the room seemed to grow more restless. Mr. 9 stood still, watching, waiting. His smile never wavered, as if he were enjoying every second of our fear. I read aloud one of the incantations, hoping it would have some effect. As the words left my lips, the room grew colder, and the number 9 on the floor flared with even greater intensity. But instead of feeling relief, I felt a sharp pain in my chest, like I was being torn from the inside out. The shadows seemed to tighten around me, squeezing the air from my lungs. The book dropped from my hands, and I gasped for air. "Foolish children," Mr. 9 hissed, stepping closer. "You think you can break what's been forged over centuries? No one escapes me, not even death." He raised his hand, and I felt a cold hand grip my heart, squeezing it with an unbearable force. I wanted to scream, but the words caught in my throat. The shadows enveloped us all, suffocating us, and the glow of the number 9 grew so intense that I thought my eyes would burn out of their sockets. But just as all hope seemed lost, something unexpected happened. From the corner of the room, Sarah, her face pale with fear, whispered a word that I hadn't noticed in the book. "Sacramentum." The air shifted. For a split second, everything went quiet. Mr. 9's expression faltered, and the glowing number 9 on the floor flickered. I didn't understand what had just happened, but it was enough to weaken the grip he had on us. Tom, looking desperate, grabbed the book and quickly scanned the pages again. "It's a binding. The ritual. It's the only way to force him back." I didn't hesitate. The three of us stood together, our hearts pounding in our chests, and we repeated the word, "Sacramentum." The air seemed to vibrate with energy. The ground beneath our feet shook violently as if something was being torn apart. Mr. 9 let out a guttural growl, his form flickering, losing its solidity. The shadows shrieked, writhing in pain. With a final, ear-splitting roar, the number 9 on the floor exploded in a burst of light, blinding us. We shielded our eyes, and when the light finally faded, we were standing in the middle of the library, alive, but alone. The manor was still, silent. The shadows were gone. Mr. 9 had vanished. We didn't know how it happened, but we knew it was over. We had broken the curse. Mr. 9 was no longer with us. But as we made our way out of the manor, the feeling of being watched lingered, and though we had escaped his grasp, I couldn't shake the feeling that the mark of the number 9 would never truly leave us. The curse might have been broken, but the legacy of Mr. 9 would live on, hidden in the corners of the world, waiting for the next soul to stumble into its grip. As we left the manor behind, I glanced back once more. For just a second, I thought I saw a shadow in the window, watching us, but when I blinked, it was gone. I didn't tell my friends what I saw. It was best not to, because deep down, I knew that Mr. 9 wasn't finished with us, not yet. He was patient, and curses, as we had learned, never truly die. They simply wait. Years passed, and the horrors of that night faded into the recesses of my mind. Buried beneath the weight of daily life, I moved away from the town where the manor stood, and with time, I convinced myself that the nightmares and the strange events were just a product of our fear, heightened by the adrenaline of that fateful trip. We had been kids, after all. Surely, we had just let our imaginations run wild, right? But something within me, something deep and primal, knew better. The curse hadn't truly ended that night in the manor. It was still with us, and it always would be. I found myself, unexpectedly, drawn back to the town one autumn evening. The sky was gray, the wind bitterly cold, and I couldn't help but think of the manor. My friends had moved on, each dealing with the memory of Mr. 9 in their own way, but I felt a strange compulsion to return. I needed closure. I told myself I needed to know the truth. As I drove closer to the manor, a cold shiver ran down my spine. The tall, looming structure still stood on the outskirts of the town, shrouded in an eerie silence. It was abandoned now, just as it had been for years, but there was something unsettling about the place. It was as if it had been waiting for me. When I arrived, the air felt thick, oppressive. The gates creaked as I pushed them open, and I stepped onto the grounds, my heart racing. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if the very earth was pushing back against me. The manor's silhouette loomed in the distance, dark against the fading light of the evening. I hesitated. My rational mind screamed at me to turn around, to leave this place behind and never look back, but I had to know. I entered the manor one last time. The door groaned as I pushed it open, and the air inside was cold, much colder than it had been outside. The dust, the decay, everything was just as I remembered it. The library, the place where it all began, stood before me like a dark memory I couldn't escape. I made my way to the center of the room, where the number 9 had burned into the floor. But now, there was nothing, just the worn wooden floorboards and the heavy silence. I almost felt relieved, but deep down, I knew that wasn't the whole story. Then, I heard it, a whisper. It came from the corner of the room, soft and insidious. "You think it's over?" I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice was familiar, chillingly so. It was the voice of Mr. 9. The shadows in the room began to shift, slowly at first, but then faster, as if they were alive. They twisted, turning into the shape of a tall, thin figure, and there he was, with Mr. 9, standing before me once again. His hollow eyes glowed, and that sickening smile stretched across his face. "You can never escape me," he said, his voice echoing through the room. "You are marked for life." I backed away, my mind racing. I had thought that by returning to the manor, I would finally put an end to this nightmare. But instead, the truth became clear. I had only sealed my fate. The curse wasn't something that could be defeated, it was something that would always follow me. As I turned to run, the door slammed shut, trapping me inside. The room grew colder, and the shadows closed in on me. I could feel Mr. 9's presence surrounding me, suffocating me. In that moment, I understood the curse wasn't just about the manor. It was about the number 9. The number would follow anyone who was touched by it, lingering in their lives like an unwanted ghost, a reminder that they were marked, and no matter where they went, it would be there, always, waiting. The floor beneath me cracked open, and I fell into darkness. I tried to scream, but no sound came. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the number 9, glowing once more, its cruel, eternal presence marking my soul. When I woke, I was back in the town, standing on the road in front of the manor, as if nothing had ever happened. My heart raced, and I looked around, bewildered. Had it all been a dream? Had I imagined it all? But then I saw it. In the reflection of the window across the street, I saw the number 9, carved into the glass. I wasn't free. And I never would be. The curse of Mr. 9 had claimed me once again. I had thought that I had escaped. The few moments of peace, when I stood outside the manor with the sun creeping over the horizon, made me almost believe that I had dreamed it all. But that reflection, the number 9, etched into the glass, burned through my mind like a brand. I knew now that this wasn't a mistake or a lingering vision. Mr. 9 was still here, still watching, still following me. It was then that I understood what had been happening all this time. The eerie coincidences, the strange sensations that had never really gone away. I had been living in the shadow of Mr. 9 for years, his curse trailing me, just waiting for me to slip up. But now, I knew, I couldn't outrun him anymore. I walked back toward the manor, every step heavier than the last. As I crossed the threshold again, the familiar chill settled over me. The place was still as silent as it had been when I first entered, but now it felt alive, almost sentient. The darkness in the corners of the rooms seemed to pulse and breathe, as if the manor was somehow aware of me, knowing what had brought me back. The number 9 burned into the floor, flickering and alive, just like it had before. This time, though, the glow felt different, more insistent, more desperate. It was as if the manor was calling out to me, or worse, warning me. I couldn't fight it any longer. There was no use pretending. The curse of Mr. 9 wasn't just a haunting. It was a force, an ancient entity that thrived on fear and despair. It had fed off me for years, growing stronger, and it would not let go. I wandered through the manor, my mind clouded with confusion and dread. I didn't know what I was looking for, but something in the back of my mind urged me to go deeper, to find whatever was left of the ritual, the incantation we had tried to use all those years ago. If there was any way to banish Mr. 9 for good, it had to be in the books. I had to finish what we started. The library, the place where it had all started, was still exactly as I remembered. The books lay in disarray, untouched and forgotten. I scanned the shelves, searching for anything that might contain the answer, any shred of knowledge that could help me. My fingers brushed across the spines, stopping when I found a dusty, leather-bound tome tucked in the back of the shelf. It wasn't the same book I had seen before, but the title on the spine was unmistakable, The End of All Things. I opened it, my heart pounding in anticipation. The pages were old, the ink faded, but the words were clear. A ritual, yes, but this one was different. This one didn't just deal with Mr. 9. It spoke of breaking the curse entirely. It was a dangerous ritual, one that required a great sacrifice. It called for the willing soul of someone bound by the curse, the one marked by the number 9. I had been marked, and the only way to escape was to give myself fully to the curse, to become one with it, offering my soul as payment. But it was a decision I could not make lightly, even with the knowledge that there was no way to live in peace without doing it. The idea of sacrificing myself made my blood run cold. As I stood there, trembling, the room seemed to darken even further. I could hear the faintest whisper, the words curling around my mind like a serpent. "You will never escape me." I turned, and there he stood, Mr. 9, right in front of me, his tall, thin form looming over me, his glowing eyes piercing through the dark. The number 9 was etched into the very air around him, its cruel shape pulsating with an ominous light. His smile was twisted, malicious. "You cannot end this. You belong to me now," he said, his voice reverberating in my chest. "There is no escape from what you have invited into your life." I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't. My legs were like stone, frozen in place. I was trapped, not just in the manor, but in this cursed existence. He had claimed me all those years ago, and now I had come back to fulfill the final part of the bargain. "Are you ready to offer yourself?" Mr. 9's voice was soft, but its power was undeniable. "Your soul is the last piece I need to finish what was started." I clutched the book in my hands, the ritual staring up at me, its consequences etched in ink, but then something in me snapped. "No," I whispered, finally finding my voice. "No." I had spent my whole life believing that I could escape the curse, but now I knew. It wasn't about running. It wasn't about trying to break free. It was about understanding the truth. Mr. 9 didn't want to break me. He wanted me to surrender. He wanted me to accept the curse. But I wasn't going to let him have that. I slammed the book shut, holding it tightly in my hands. The shadows in the room writhed in fury, but I didn't let go. The number 9 flickered and shrieked as if it were alive, fighting against me, but I held on, refusing to be its prisoner. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the room. The manor trembled, and the walls began to collapse. Mr. 9 screamed in rage, but his form flickered, destabilizing, as if the curse itself was being torn apart. The number 9 burned one last time, brighter than ever, before it finally shattered, and with it, Mr. 9's form disappeared, his scream echoing through the manor until it was silenced by the crash of the collapsing walls. I didn't know what happened next. My body felt heavy, my mind blurry, as if I had been pulled into some strange void. When I finally opened my eyes, I was lying on the cold floor of the manor, the walls gone, and the space around me empty. The number 9 was nowhere to be found. The curse, it seemed, had finally been broken, but the question lingered in my mind: had I truly escaped? Or had I just become another part of the curse, another ghost trapped in the manor, waiting for the next soul to come through its doors? I didn't have the answers, and perhaps I never would, but for the first time in years, I felt the weight of Mr. 9 lift from me. The darkness, the shadows, they were gone. And so, I walked out of the manor for the last time, the number 9 fading away behind me, unsure if I had truly freed myself, or if it was just the beginning of something darker. Some curses never truly end.